A velvet curtain stirs in the torchlight of a stone hallway. Beyond it, incense clings to the damp air like rotting lace. Gold-trimmed robes trail across flagstones caked with filth. A man stands in his chamber, his breath shallow, his pores weeping under layers of sweat and powder. A servant kneels behind him, holding a vial of liquid in trembling hands. The king is ready to be perfumed. He does not bathe. He despises water. His court believes it thins the blood. So instead, each morning, the ruler of millions anoints himself with the aged urine of young boys, fermented in silver jars, prized for its musk. He believes it makes him divine outside. Plague blossoms like rot beneath the skin. Children starve beside fountains gilded in lapis. Inside, court physicians diagnose by the shape of stool and bleed women for pleasure. A noble woman crushes lice in her hair with pearls. Her smile is full of missing teeth. These are not eccentricities. These are not quirks of the times. They are deliberate rituals of power, performed by kings who saw their bodies not as human, but sacred. To question their filth was heresy. To smell cleaner than your monarch was a punishable sin today. We strip away the perfume of myth. We descend into the reeking opulence of royal history, where the closer one got to the throne, the more one choked on its stench. This is not a story of hygiene. It is a story of ego, ignorance, and a terrifying theater of divine rule, where disgust became doctrine, and rot was worn like a crown. He awoke before the sun. Not by choice, the sun would follow him, not precede him. In the chill just before dawn, the rooms of Versailles did not yet shimmer. They creaked, they stank, they whispered with the breath of dozens of servants waiting. In silence behind walls, behind velvet drapes, behind the illusion of royal solitude, Louis stirred beneath heavy brocade. His body, drenched in the sweat of too many layers, had not touched water in weeks. He did not bathe. He could not. To immerse the royal flesh in water was to weaken it, to pierce its invisible armor. Water was for peasants. Gods did not drown. The chamber doors opened slowly. One servant entered to open the curtains, another to fluff the pillows, then another and another, until the room was thick with the scent of scented rot, powders and oils layered atop skin, atop flesh, atop the slow decomposition of a man. Worshipped as a son, and then with practiced ceremony, the chamber pot was brought. It was not hidden. It was not shameful. It was the throne before the throne. A golden basin, polished and emptied by trembling hands. Around it gathered a small crowd of nobles, sons of dukes, cousins of counts, each desperate to be chosen, to be near, to be blessed by the morning ritual. Louis sat. They watched, the hiss of water, the shift of silk, the squirming of suppressed shame. None dared flinch. This was not humiliation. This was theater. This was power rehearsed into ritual. The more obscene the display, the more divine the actor. And in this silent liturgy, the court confirmed its place. Beneath, he wiped nothing. That too was part of the play. Instead, perfumers approached with tiny vials, scents strong enough to silence the body. Musks distilled from ambergris, civet, the fermented oils of boys' urine. A perfume made not to attract, but to dominate. The air was not made sweet. It was made unbearable. A fog one either choked on or submitted to. No one coughed. The nobles bowed as Louis stood. One would collect the used chamberpot. Another would fold the linens touched by his heel. To serve the king was not to feed him or clothe him. It was to witness him, to endure him, to disappear beneath him. And so Versailles reeked, not from neglect, but from design. The stench was a signature, a warning, a declaration. You were not meant to breathe freely here. You were meant to be owned. The walls did not echo laughter, but the shuffling feet of courtiers afraid to blink. The mirrors did not reflect beauty, but duplicity. dozens of eyes watching the king relieve himself and pretending it was grace. Obedience was measured by how long you could kneel beside the steaming bowl and smile. And as the ritual ended, the Sun King turned his head. He did not speak. He did not need to. His gaze alone chose who would eat, who would marry, who would vanish. With the same hand that had moments ago rested upon his thighs, he gestured toward a trembling boy. The chosen one wept with gratitude. Outside, the fountains of Versailles thundered with icy water. Clean, abundant, unreachable. 1,000 peasants might die to drink from them. But within the palace, thirst was ornamental. And filth was sacred. The king would now dress, and the day, finally, could begin. It was warm when he lifted the vial, not by fire, by flesh. The jar had been cradled overnight beneath the bed of a stable boy. His youth thought to sweeten the musk. The monarch did not speak as he uncorked the lid. He only closed his eyes. And, breathed in, the scent was acrid, sharp, animal. But to him, it was sacred, a cleansing baptism in filth. He dabbed it behind his ears, across the throat, into the folds of skin, unwashed by water. And when he opened his eyes, he was not merely scented, he was fortified. This was no perfume. It was protection, a seal against rot, plague, death. To smell, like urine, was to declare war against mortality. And the king, whose body had never known soap, believed he was winning. Others believed, too. In royal courts across empires, urine was harvested with reverence, poured into silver goblets, left to ferment under moonlight, sealed in crystal. The urine of virgins, of infants, of red-haired boys. Their bodies never asked. Their fluids never refused. In this pale, acidic tonic, kings gargled. They rinsed, their teeth with it, rubbed it on their temples when plagued by headaches. Some drank it, warm. Others bathed wounds with it, believing it carried divine memory, preserved the soul in liquid form. When a monarch bled, it was not to purge illness, but to make room for this. No one laughed, not even in secret, because to mock the scent of the king was treason. And to smell sweeter was worse. Servants were often warned. "You reek of flowers," one was told. He was beaten until his nose bled, the punishment for purity. Another, too fastidious in his washing, was dismissed, not for laziness, but for disobedience of the invisible law. A king's stench must be the court's atmosphere. All must breathe him in. All must become part of him. There were manuals whispered between physicians and perfumers. Not books, but rites. Mixtures of vinegar, ash, stale wine, bile. And at the center, always the golden tincture. Some claimed it sharpened sight. Others swore it cured melancholy. One royal mistress bathed in it for luck. Her skin blistered. She did not complain. Behind these rituals was a deeper silence, one shaped not by ignorance, but by awe. The body of the monarch was no longer flesh. It was symbol, and the fluids it leaked, decayed, secreted. They were not waste. They were gospel. To collect a king's urine was an honor. To carry it, a privilege. To store it, a prayer when disease swept the countryside. When boils festered and limbs blackened, commoners were blamed for their filth. But when kings fell ill, it was not their dirt. It was the fault of heaven. The rituals must not have been sacred enough. The scent, not strong enough. The wrong boy, the wrong jar. Not enough belief, so they doubled the dosage, tripled it. King's physician once insisted that the most fragrant cures came from midstream. Another preferred the morning's first drop. The taste was not masked. It was embraced. The idea was simple. If the body could be taught to love what it expelled, it could never decay. But the body did decay, and the rot was always hardest to smell at court. because it had been so thoroughly perfumed, in a room hung with crimson drapes, a monarch's mistress sits alone, her breath shallow, her teeth loose. She has not bathed in 4 years. Her body powders itself daily in urine and crushed pearls. She believes it keeps her young, but her skin has begun to peel, and the scent never leaves. She weeps. At night, but not from pain, from confusion. She no longer remembers what clean is, or if it ever mattered. Elsewhere, in a marble corridor, a young page runs a cloth across a throne slick with sweat and secretions. He tries not to gag. He's told it's a rite of passage. He dreams of silence, of air, of flowers. But there are none here. Just warmth, just musk, just ritual, just the ever-thickening fog of belief that clings to the body long after it has ceased to live. There was never anything divine about the stench, but it was the only thing left that proved the king had once been there, and so they kept it. The basin waited by the door, porcelain rimmed with gold. Empty, it had been carried in at dawn, as it was every day, filled with warmed water once, long ago, but not now, not anymore. Now it was ceremonial, a symbol of what would not be done, a reminder the king would not bathe. He could not. The body was too sacred, the skin too delicate, the pores, portals through which illness might slip unseen. Water was treachery. To bathe was to weaken the flesh, to welcome death into the blood. He had learned this as a boy. His mother whispered it to him as she sponged his arms with vinegar and wine, never letting the liquid soak too deep. His tutors repeated it more sternly, and his physicians, trembling men with eyes like birds, told him that to sweat was to survive, but to bathe was to invite the grave. He believed them, or he feared them. It no longer mattered which, so his skin hardened, thickened, cracked beneath the silks. His feet bled in his boots, and no one dared speak of the smell. He covered the sores with ribbons, powdered his neck until it itched. He scratched at night until he bled through the sheets, but still, he did not wash. Elsewhere, peasants were drowned for being witches. Women were scrubbed raw in the name of purity. But here, in palaces of marble and velvet, kings rotted slowly. In their own perfume, it was not neglect. It was law. To bathe was to expose the body. And kings did not expose. They were not flesh. They were more. Their decay was different. Righteous, holy. A servant once spilled a bucket of clean water in the presence of a queen. It soaked her hem. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She simply stared. And for 3 days, no one in her court was allowed to drink. The silence was unbearable. The message, clearer than thunder, water was not for royalty. She died, years later, from an infection in her womb. They buried her in 7 layers of wool and drenched her coffin in lily. No one spoke of the smell. The doctrine held rot meant discipline. Cracks in the skin meant prayer. Sores were signs of piety. Dirt became a second skin, one not to be removed, but to be revered. A veil of suffering woven into the skin of the divine. In one court, a prince had his linens boiled in rosewater each morning, but he would not touch the water itself. He rubbed his wrists with the cloth and believed himself purified. He once confessed to a priest that he feared the sound of splashing. It reminded him of drowning. The priest told him that saints feared water too, and so the myth endured at night. The palaces pulsed with sweat and incense. The walls wept condensation from the fevered air. Servants crept through the corridors with towels never used, soaps never opened, and in every chamber the scent of slow decay. Familiar, expected, worshipped. The people outside whispered stories. They said the king's touch could heal the sick, that his sweat could drive out demons, that the closer he was to the grave, the more blessed he became. They never asked why he never touched water. They never dared, because to question the filth of a god was to question God itself, and in a world where death came from wind and breath and shadows, better to believe that rot was holy than to admit it was human. The basin by the door remained empty. Tomorrow it would return again, and no one would dare fill it. The queen lifted her hand, slow and deliberate, and placed the jeweled comb against her scalp. The room fell silent. It was morning in Vienna, or what passed for it, behind velvet drapes thick enough to drown the sun. Incense hung in the air, like fog. A single window cracked open to let in a sliver of cold air, and nothing else. The lice preferred warmth. She dragged the comb through the powdered nest of her hair. White flakes fell to her shoulders. Not snow, not dandruff, shells. Bile-colored, translucent, clinging to curls lacquered with grease. She tilted the comb toward the light, inspecting the teeth. One twitched, she smiled. The gesture was not shameful. It was practiced. The same way another woman might lift a wine glass. The court watched her with admiration. Some with envy. She reached for a sapphire pin, pressed it gently to the living pearl in her comb, and crushed it. The sound was soft, like a whisper, like the ending of something that had never asked to begin. And again, silence, not horror. Reverence, lice were not disease. They were a bond. A reminder that beneath the wigs and gowns and coronets, everyone itched the same. The queen, the courtesan, the chambermaid. Parasites blurred hierarchy. They were democracy by another name. So to kill them was not simply hygiene. It was dominance. Of one's own flesh, of one's position, the queen crushed. 4 more before she spoke. She asked the room if anyone had brought her mirror. A servant stepped forward. He kept his eyes down. Mirrors did not reflect the soul. They exposed the truth. And in courts like this, truth was best kept to a single face. Her eyes scanned the glass. Her scalp bled in 3 places. She dabbed each one with a cloth embroidered in gold thread. Then she returned to combing. Nearby, a countess did the same, though more discreetly. Her comb had rubies inlaid along its spine. She carried it at her waist, wrapped in kid leather like a weapon. She too found lice. She too crushed them. There was no shame, only intimacy. Slow, methodical, shared. Noblemen scratched beneath powdered periwigs. Footmen plucked eggs from sleeves and flicked them into fireplaces. Bed sheets were never changed. Nightgowns were rarely washed. The heat of bodies pressed against brocade and wood. Lice flourished in the folds of power. Some said they were drawn to greatness. Others said they were a test. The court did not argue. It accepted. And in that acceptance, became one body. Crawling, itching, unspoken, the king once joked quietly that his favorite mistress was never alone. He said it with affection, not contempt. She had wept, not from insult, but from gratitude. Even his lice were loyal. At balls, nobles compared bite marks like medals. A duke kept a tally. A duchess trained her maid to collect them in small jars, like crushed pearls dried in sun. It was said she buried them near the chapel, as offerings. To what? No one asked. This was not madness. It was devotion. A ritual made of vermin and silence. And when the queen finally stood, her gown catching on the lacquered floor, she left behind a trail of crushed bodies, tiny, broken, fragrant with her perfume, and the court followed, because no one wanted to be the last to comb, or the only one left untouched. It began before the doors opened, a heaviness in the corridor, not of footsteps of air. Thick, cloying, invisible fingers pressing against the throat before the eyes adjusted to candlelight. He was inside. They knew it by the scent, not foul, not putrid, worse. Designed, a perfume so potent it silenced instinct. The kind that lingered in silk, in lace, in lungs. Sweet at first, flowers rotted into syrup, but beneath it, something ancient. A violence disguised in velvet. The smell of something that should not be alive. But still moved, the king was at court, and every breath was submission. He did not bathe. No one did. That was known, but no one said it. Instead, they said he was well-scented, that his presence could be felt before he spoke. They called it charisma. They did not call it what it was, a wall of odor. A fortress made not of stone, but of smell. Behind it stood perfumers. A hidden court behind the court, men and women, whose hands were yellowed from musk and animal grease. Their tools were knives and fire. Their currency, secretions, whispers. Death bottled and branded as glory, ambergris scraped from the intestines of dead whales. Civet oil milked from the glands of panicked cats, chained and beaten into fragrance. Fermented urine, left to steep beneath the palace stairs. Crushed petals, molded resins, charcoal, clove, rot. They mixed it with gloves, with wax, with cloth. They soaked fans in it, rubbed it into wigs, laced letters with it. One princess had the walls of her dressing room painted with it. Another lined her coffin. In it, to keep her scent intact beyond death, because to smell strong was not to mask the body. It was to transcend it, not to outstink decay itself. The poor had no such armor. They smelled of what they were: meat, breath, toil. Their bodies were not perfumed, only punished. They sweated, they bled. They rotted and were blamed for it. But the nobles, they reeked like kings, and kings reeked like gods. It was a scent that clawed at the mind, tore down the difference between power and plague, pleasure and disease. In the court of Louis, women wore gloves soaked in civet oil. It left stains on their skin, black rings that never fully faded. They kissed with mouths lined in scent, and swallowed slowly, so as not to disrupt the illusion. Their children cried at night, unable to sleep in the cloud of it. Servants died, young not from illness, but from air too thick to breathe. One perfumer collapsed beside his boiling vat. The room was sealed to preserve the blend. His family was paid in silence. No one protested. The king once ordered a special blend, a scent so overwhelming it erased the memory of other smells. He called it victory. It was said to have included the ashes of a bishop's robes and the tears of a widow. The recipe was never written down, only passed between tongues. When he wore it, animals turned from him. A stable boy vomited in his presence. He was executed for disrespect. In the chapel, incense covered the pews like fog. The priest wept during sermons, but no one knew if it was grief or the sting of scent. People dreamed of flowers and woke with nosebleeds, and still, they praised it, called it refinement, progress, modernity, because to question it, to say aloud that it smelled like death in disguise, was to risk exile. To risk offending the king's nose was to risk offending the king's essence. So they inhaled deeper, smiled wider, and let their lungs blacken in silence. At the masquerade, every mask was perfumed, each guest a walking vial of decay. When the music stopped, no one spoke. They were afraid to open their mouths, afraid the truth might slip out. Beneath the sweetness, that all they had become was scent, a perfume worn so long it began to think. The linens had already been folded, not with care, with precision, the edges sharp, creased as if ironed by prayer. The stool was wiped, the vessel warmed, the gloves laid out like relics of a sacred rite. No one spoke. Not yet. The king was preparing to be emptied. It was not shameful. It was not hidden. This was not the body reduced. It was the body exalted, the body made divine by subtraction. He had eaten little the night before. He was instructed not to. His physician's warning still echoed beneath the ribs. A blocked king is a dying kingdom. The court had nodded. No one laughed. It wasn't a jest dot. The syringe was long, carved from ivory, polished but no less blunt. It rested in a shallow bowl beside the bed, surrounded by towels that smelled faintly of vinegar and starch. The king lay on his side, and the ritual began. The room was full, as it always was. Courtiers, attendants, physicians, and those who wished to be seen by the king, even if only by the curve of his spine. They watched the procedure with studied detachment, some with envy, others with fascination, but all with reverence. To be present at the royal purge was a privilege. The physician's fingers trembled only slightly as he inserted the tip. Oil, rosewater, sheep's bile. A stream of heat, followed by stillness. The king did not speak. He did not wince. That would suggest weakness. That would suggest the body could feel. He did not feel. He ruled, and this too was ruling invasive, repetitive, divine, sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes twice in one day, depending on the moon, depending on his mood. His entrails were not organs, they were symbols. To regulate them was to command nature itself. When he bled, he did so into glass. Thin lines of crimson drawn from the forearm, from the thigh, from the ankle. Depending on the ailment, too tired? Bleed the wrist, too angry? Let the neck drip. The king's veins were maps, charted by men with trembling hands and anointed. Lancets once, he fainted during the 5th bleeding of the month. The room held its breath. He was revived with vinegar and slapped twice. Then came the silence, then the applause. It was said he had banished illness with his own blood. The queen, too, was not spared. Her rectum was accessed weekly. They whispered about it behind silken fans, but never in derision, always in awe. Her enema blend was infused with crushed gems, a perfumed purge, a royal bloom. Even the children were probed. Little princes cried. In silence, their faces pressed to damask cushions, while hot syrups were pushed into places never spoken of. They learned early. Pain was not private. Flesh was not theirs. Cleanliness did not come from water. It came from release. One noble woman passed out after a bleeding. The king called it traumatic. She was removed from court. Her name was never spoken. Again, the true horror was not the act. It was the gaze. No one looked away. Not out of cruelty, but out of duty. The body was a canvas, a mirror, a theater of obedience. To flinch was treason. To question was death. There was something sacred in submission, something holy in hollowing. A monarch emptied was a monarch purified, and when the bowl was finally carried away, covered in velvet and ash, the physician bowed low, his hands shaking, his lips stained with sweat. The king did not look at him. He simply reached for his powder, dabbed his face, and asked what day it was. Court answered in unison. It was Thursday enema day, like always. She was dismissed at sunrise, no warning, no trial, just a hand raised in the cold and silence. The queen had said nothing. She never needed to. It was the scent that betrayed the girl, too fresh. A breath of rose oil in a room meant to stink. Of skin and submission, that alone was enough. A fragrance mistaken for ambition. A whisper of rebellion that clung too long to the air. She had bathed that morning. Once she never returned. Cleanliness in the palace was not virtue. It was defiance. Servants were warned. Do not wash too often. Do not perfume too boldly. Do not let the scent of your body rise above the sovereign's. If the queen stank of milk and mold, you must smell of less. If the king wore musk-like armor, you must choke beneath it, smile, and bow. The hierarchy of rot was sacred, and mirrors, those polished windows of disobedience, were watched carefully. If a maid's reflection outshone her mistress, the mirror was covered. If a page's teeth gleamed too white, he was fed vinegar for a week. One cook was stripped of title after being seen scrubbing his fingernails too thoroughly. A man with nothing to hide, they whispered, has something to prove. It was not about hygiene. It never was. It was about control. The visible proof that you knew your place. Beneath, a nobleman once tried to dazzle court with his embroidered cuffs and perfumed gloves. The king did not speak to him for a month. At the next gathering, the noble arrived in stained linen and crusted boots. He was praised for his humility. He learned they all did, because power in its most fragile form demands decay. Not decay of the body alone, but of will, of pride, of beauty. To be clean was to challenge the illusion. And the illusion was everything. So servants rubbed ash into their palms to appear darker. They let lice roam free in their hair. They wore the same shirts until they stiffened with sweat. And when they passed the monarch in narrow halls, they held their breath, not out of reverence, but so no one could accuse them of breathing sweeter than the crown. No one dared polish their boots too brightly. Reflection was treason. Even silence had texture. The scullery girl who hummed while she worked was told her joy was disruptive. The boy whose face flushed too red from scrubbing was told to work in colder rooms. One attendant was accused of seducing. The king with her scent. She had only crushed lavender between her fingers to hide the stink of blood. She was beaten for vanity. Filth was safety. Suffering a shield, those who smelled worst were closest to the throne. And the irony, sickening and sharp, was this. The monarchs did not suffer the stench. They had grown numb to it. It followed them like a ghost. But their fear was not of dirt. It was of reflection, of seeing in someone beneath them the illusion crack, and so they ruled with fragrance, with absence, with the quiet terror that even the smallest clean hand might become a mirror, and the palace, grand, golden, unwashed, became a mausoleum of scented obedience where nothing was allowed to shine, not even the truth. The portrait hangs in silence, painted skin like porcelain, lips gently parted, a curl of powdered hair frozen above an ivory shoulder. There is no sweat, no blemish, no scent. The room is empty. But she is still being watched. She wears silk, but you do not hear it rustle. She smiles, but you do not smell the rot behind her teeth. There is no lice comb, no chamberpot, no crimson basin steaming beside her bed. This is how she is remembered, but it is not how she lived. History, like perfume, masks, it takes the rotting body and embalms it in myth. It scrubs until nothing stains. The blood, the bile, the sweat trapped. Beneath layers of brocade, all erased. And in their place, elegance. The kind that does not breathe. The kind that never weeps. The kind that never dared to itch. We tell ourselves it was beautiful. The palace. The pageantry. The grace of it. All, but we forget the bruises beneath corsets. The stench behind velvet. The fear woven into every silence. We forget that no one washed. That no one dared be clean. That behind every mirror, someone watched, not for beauty, but for danger, because to remember it truly would be to question everything we built atop it. The myth survives because it is easier than truth, because truth stinks, and we are trained to turn away from what stinks. But the truth stands still, patient, waiting in the folds of dresses once burned for infection, waiting in the pages never, written in the bodies never painted, in the mouths that opened and were never heard from again. A queen bathed in urine, a king perfumed with whale vomit, a boy punished for being too clean, and yet the tapestries still hang, still golden, still silent. We walk past them in museums and tell our children they were grand. We do not say they were sick. We do not say they. were afraid, we do not say they were dying every day, beneath the weight of power so fragile it could not bear a drop of soap. There are no perfumes left from that time. They've soured, turned to dust, but the lie still lingers that royalty was grace, that monarchy was beauty, that power could be elegant. It could not. It never was, and now, beneath the oil and the canvas, the woman in the portrait waits. She does not blink. She does not breathe. She only stares, as if daring you to ask what she smelled like, as if begging you to remember, not the myth, but the body beneath it.